All right, guys, let's get into the front end bits of our Paytm application. Until this point, I'm hoping you've done the first 14 points. You can find the current checkpoint code base here on the backend dash solution branch of this repository, or you can go through all the 14 steps and create the backend yourself. By the end of it, try to hit some of these endpoints in Postman and make sure things work as expected. For me, I have MongoDB running locally. If I show you my Docker, there is a MongoDB instance running. It's running on localhost colon 27017, which is why if you look at the solution here in db.js, the URL that I'm connecting to is localhost colon 27017. If you're doing the same thing locally, if you're not coding yourself but cloning the Paytm project locally, you first have to start the database locally or start the database using a free database on mongodb.com. Ideally, the best way to do it is the Docker file that is present in the main branch. So there is a Docker file present in the main branch. There were instructions in the last video as to how you can start Docker locally. I can still show you. The way to start Docker locally is if you clone this repository and you are in the master branch. Main branch. You have a Docker file here. You can run first this command to build your Docker image, assuming you do have Docker in your machine. So the command is docker build /-t MongoDB colon 4.7 -rep, or you can call this whatever you want basically. This will build your image. And then the second command you have to run is docker run, give it a name, give it a port mapping, run it in detached mode, and the same tag that you had here, have it here, and this will start MongoDB locally on your machine. How can you confirm MongoDB is running? So these are the two commands you have to run. Once you run them, you should be able to run the docker ps command to see a Docker image running locally. Again, we haven't discussed Docker yet, so if you don't understand this, this is fine. You can just get a free MongoDB instance from mongodb.com. But I would generally suggest to be able to start MongoDB locally. You can also install MongoDB locally, given whatever the install on Mac, whatever other steps you can find here. All right. Once you do these, the way to confirm that it's actually running is open MongoDB Compass and try to connect to this specific URL. I'll show you which one. As soon as this opens, MongoDB colon / localhost colon 27017. This is MongoDB Compass, the GUI for visualizing Mongo. And if I connect on it, if I'm actually able to see a database, which I am here, then that means we're good to go. If you don't see admin or config here, that means there is a problem. Let me delete the Paytm database that I have here, so we can start from a fresh slate right here. So I have an empty MongoDB URL, an empty MongoDB database locally. I would urge you to get one yourself. And once you do that, you can clone Paytm and go to the backend's solution branch, or you can go through all steps from 1 to 14 and make sure you have the backend running locally. How can you confirm backend is running perfectly? Try to hit some of these endpoints. I'm going to do the same now. If I go here, let me go to the backend dash solution branch. This is the command that you have to run to go to that branch. And now if I go to backend, run npm install followed by node index.js, seems to be starting correctly. If I go to localhost colon 3000, I do see an Express server running. Nothing is on the / endpoint, and hence I see this. Let me try to hit some of the endpoints that we have created until now. If you remember from the last class, the endpoints that we had created were, the first one is a sign up endpoint that a user can hit to actually sign up on the website. The arguments that are expected are username, password, first name and last name. and the route is /API/v1. Let me zoom this in a bit. /API/v1/user/signup. If I hit this endpoint, you will see it says user created successfully, and it gives you back a token. Eventually, when we create the website, we will see how and where can we store this token. But for now, I'm just going to copy it over to my clipboard. If I try to send the same request again, it says email already exists. So let me create a few users. So we have a few users in our application to play with. And once I've signed up a few users, let me hit the endpoint to get back my balance. For that, I need to send the right authorization header. So whatever token I got from the sign up endpoint, I'm going to send here. It is a GET request to localhost :3000 /API/v1/account/balance. The sign up request was POST. This one is a GET request. It shows me my balance is 6085. This is a initial balance that we gave to all users, which is a random number between 1 and 10,000. If I go to MongoDB now, you can see my Paytm database is populated. If I open this, users has a bunch of users, their first name, last name, and password. Accounts has a bunch of balances for these users. The first user has this much balance, second user has this much balance, so on and so forth. And as you remember, 6085.87 is what I saw in Postman as well. So the endpoint is working correctly. The third endpoint, which is the important one here, is the transfer endpoint to actually send money from one account to another. The parameters look something like this. It needs to be a POST request. It needs to have the right authorization header for the person who is sending the money, and the body needs to have two arguments. Two, which is who are you sending money to? Let's say user number 1, which is this user right here, is sending money to user number 2. So the ID of that person and the amount that you're sending. Let's say they're sending 100 rupees. Remember, this user's balance was 6085.8. If I transfer this a few times and then again try to check the balance of this user, you will notice it has gone down by 400 rupees because I sent 4 requests to transfer. The first person now has 5600 rupees and the second one has 520 because 400 rupees got moved from here to here. This is how a basic Paytm application works. There are nuances, specifically, transactions, the thing that we discussed. If you're making an application like this, you have to be very sure that whenever the transfer is happening, either all the database calls happen or none of them happen. There are more details about this on step 10, where we discuss transactions in detail. So feel free to look at this, and also this also has a bunch of details around how you would implement the transfer endpoint specifically. This part is super important. On step 13, an endpoint for the users to transfer money to another account. There are a few good solutions, bad solutions, and the problems that you might run into. If you remember from the last class, we also saw how transactions are important for a use case like this. This was the backend. Make sure you're able to run it locally and all these endpoints work. What we're implementing now is number 1, the front end, and hooking up the front end to the main backend that we're running locally. So let's get into that next. The first thing you have to do is you have a React application already. So there is a front end folder in backend solution. Here you need to first do an npm install and then try to run it locally, so that we have a basic front-end React app that's already bootstrapped for us. If you look at the project, it already had a backend folder and a front-end folder. If you look at the front-end folder, right now it has a basic boilerplate code here. Let me get rid of everything. Let me get rid of all the divs here. Let me go to index.css and remove everything. Let me go to app.css and remove everything. So I have a completely empty application running locally. If I refresh, it's an empty application. If I add a hi there here, I see hi there here. From this starter point, let's start to build our Paytm application end to end. All right. So in the last hour or so, I wrote a bunch of code for the front end bits of this application. I haven't added any functionality, but I wrote all the designs so that it's easy for us to just hook up the backend calls rather than spending too much time on writing the front end code. I will still take you through all the components that I have created and how I've added routing and what does the application look like right now. Let's look at step 15. Over here it says, first import React Router DOM to your project. The way to do that is npm install React Router DOM. And once you do that, you can add a routing to your page. If you look at my app.jsx, I've made some changes here, which of course you wouldn't have in the original backend solution repository, which is I've added 4 routes to our applications: /signup, /signin, /dashboard, and /send. These are pointing to components in my project, but where are these components stored? I've put them in a new directory called pages/signup, pages/signin. If you look at it, the pages directory has 4 components, which are the top level screens that I need to support. What are the screens that I need to support? It is this sign up screen. There is a similar sign in screen. There is a dashboard screen, and there is a send money screen. These are the 4 routes pointing to components that actually have the code which renders something like this. Before we get into this code though, before we get into what the sign up component looks like, which as you can see is a very big component, we should understand whenever you're doing front-end development, you want to break the app down into smaller components and build those smaller components. Once you've built the smaller components, it's easy for you to build the whole page from it. For example, if you look at the sign up page, it can effectively be broken down into smaller components that you can build. For example, a heading component, which if you have added Tailwind to your project, which what is the way to do? Go to tailwindcss.com, get started, installation, framework guides, select Vite over here and follow all these steps end to end, which I've already done for this project. If you do add Tailwind to your project as the styling library, then all you have to do for creating this sign up component, this heading components, which basically renders this very big title, is something like this. Export function heading, take a label as an input, which is what should be rendered, and then put that label inside a div, which has font bold, text very big 4XL, and PT6, which means some padding on the top. If you put this inside a component, you effectively have a single simple heading component that you have created that you can use throughout your application. Why did I encapsulate it into a different heading component? Because this can be used in 2 places, in both the sign in page and the sign up page. Since both of these pages require this title thing at the top, which I've called heading, I can reuse this component that I just created, which is the heading component. And if in the future the designer changes this to green color, I just have to make that green color change here. I don't have to make it in multiple places. If you look at the code base in what are the directories that I have? There is pages, which have the top level pages, and there is components, which has all of these small components that I've created. Specifically, the one that we were looking at was heading.jsx, which as you can see, puts an incoming label inside a div. Now, if you look at the sign up page, you will notice the very first thing it has at the top is heading label equal to sign up. It of course has a bunch of things to add this card and have a gray color as the background. But after those divs, the first thing it has inside this card is this heading component. And the same thing is true for the sign in component. If you go to the sign in component, you see heading at the very top. Of course, it is wrapped inside a div, which will probably give the background gray color inside another div that makes this div centralized on the vertical axis. And then finally the card, which has a background white and then, width of 80, so on and so forth. After you create this card, inside this card, the first thing we have is the heading. Second thing, what do we have? The subheading. This thing right here, if I scroll down, the second component we have to worry about is the subheading component, which again, I would urge you to write this yourself. But if you look at it here, what is the code? It just wraps this label inside a gray colored text, because this color here of the text is gray. Text MD, slightly smaller text, some padding at the top, some horizontal padding, and then some padding at the bottom. That creates this second subheading component that I can use, where I can use the subheading component both in sign in and in sign up. And like this, I have created all the components that I need. An input box component that first renders the label and then renders an actual input box. If you look at this in full screen, what is this? This is some label followed by an input box. So why not put this together inside a single component, which I'm calling the input box component. So let me again put these side to side. Let's quickly look at the input box component. Again, all of these are stored where? All of these are stored in the components folder. Slightly small text, font medium. I don't know what font medium is. Let me check. Totally forgot. A lot of these classes I sort of miss. It's the font weight, correct. As you can see, this is slightly bolder. What is font weight in CSS? You can Google it. It's basically how bold the text is. So if you look at font weight, if you have more font weight, your text will be bolder. And if I've selected font medium here, because I want this to be slightly bolder than compared to, for example, this font right here, and align the text to the left, some padding on the top, along with an input box, which is this input box that you see right here. Both of these create this first component, and then the second component and the third component. All of these can be input boxes. Again, there is no functionality here right now. I have not yet added the state management code that, actually takes this input and sends this to the backend. This is just a starter point of TK. You can start creating the structure of your application. Heading, subheading, 4 input boxes, heading, subheading, 4 input boxes. And then finally a button, which again, this button, I actually ended up copying over from this very nice tutorial on this website called Flowbyte. It has a bunch of variations of buttons. The third one I copied, which is this dark button right here, which is what we needed. Removed the things that I did not feel were necessary and created a button component, which has a bunch of these classes like full width and then, white color, text, background color, slightly black, so on and so forth. This is how I first built all of these components for both bottom warning, basically this thing right here, which has some, look at the bottom warning component, takes label, button text and 2 as an input. Okay, bhai, what do you want to render here? What do you want to render here? And where should the user go when they click on this button? When they click on the sign in button, they should reach the sign in page. When they click on similarly, the login page has another warning at the bottom right here. They should reach the sign up page from there. So I just take that as an input. And if you look at where all bottom warning is used, I've used it just basically in the sign up page. Bottom warning label is already have an account question mark, Button text is what should appear on the button. I'm calling this a button. You can call this, a link if you want to. Sign in. And where should the user go when they click on this link? They should go to the /sign in page. The component inside actually wraps this button text inside a link, which routes the user to whatever the input that the component received. So if the component received /sign in, the user goes to /sign in from here, because the button text, this text right here, is wrapped inside a link, which if you remember, lets you go from one page to another. All right. This much is good enough for you to create both the sign up page and the sign in page. This is what the sign up page looks like, sign in page looks like, and this is what the sign up page looks like. So you can look at the full sign in page, full sign up page. In the end, both of them use a bunch of components that I have just written, and they're very small components, all written and put in the components folder here. If you want to test just this much, npm run dev after you've made all of these code changes, And if I go to localhost:5173/signup, I see a very nice sign up page. If I click on sign in, it takes me to the sign in page. As you can see, the route changed. Sign up goes back to the sign up page. I have one part of my project ready, the non-auth pages. Next, I need to create the auth pages, which is the page that actually renders your user list and lets you send money. Those have also been created, and again been created in this very frugal manner of breaking it down into small components and then rendering all those components one by one. For example, if you look at the first signed in component, signed in page, it looks something like this. It is a page that has a top bar and then shows you your balance and shows you a list of users. Again, all the functionality we need to add, but at least the pretty work of creating, a component like this in a website like this has been done. In the next part, we'll actually add some functionality. Before we reach there, I've added some dummy data. So we have at least a front end to look at. If you look at the code, the app bar has, some shadow here because, you need the app bar to have some shadow at the bottom. And then Paytm app is a very big bold text at the left side. And then on the right side, you have an icon and hello. Again, you can look at all of these components one by one. All of them are basically a bunch of Tailwind classes put together. If you want to look at how to look at these specific files, you can go to the dashboard component, which renders the complete dashboard. The app bar it renders, which is this app bar right here. And then it renders something called the balance, which shows you your balance right here. This second thing. And then it renders the users component, which shows you all the users. Once you click on a user, you should reach the final component, which is this guy right here, the send money component, which is a single file in which I've written everything. I did not break this down into smaller components because, these don't need to be reused in a different file. If this green button, for example, or this avatar component had to be reused, then I would have written it into smaller components. Generally, also, it's a good idea to break it down. But for this specific component, I just wanted to show you can put everything in a single file as well. That is also fine. There's a bunch of Tailwind classes which has everything. The background div, the card, the send money, friend's name, so on and so forth. It still has hard-coded values like friend's name. So in the next section, we will actually get into how can we add some functionality to this. We've already written a lot of HTML with Tailwind classes that gives us a very pretty page. For example, if I go to /send, you will see a very nice send money page. If I go to /dashboard, you will see a dashboard page, which pretty much looks like we would expect it to. But this is hard coded. The list of users is hard coded. This balance is hard coded. How can I get these things from the backend, and how can I put them there for a user? And how does, when someone reaches this page and put an amount, how can they actually send some money to the backend is what we will discuss next. All right, let's kick things off by implementing the sign up component. This guy first needs to store all the input values in some state variable here. And then once you have them, you send a request to the backend whenever the user clicks on this button. So we need to change the shape of these components a little bit. Right now the components don't have any functionality. They just are a pretty way to render things. But now we need to add some functionality in here. We need to allow storing of state variables that the user, from the values that the user is putting in these input boxes. For that, what I would do is, if this is my input box, amongst the label and the placeholder that I'm getting, I'll also take on change as an input. And I'll be like, by any time the input changes, I'm going to call the parents on change function with the same values. What this will do is, okay, now in the parent, I can be like on change equal to E. And then using this event, which basically is the same event that is triggered anytime the input is changed, I can be like set first name e.target.value. We've already done this for simple input boxes. If I had a simple input box here, I could have simply been like on change, set value e.target.value. This is something we've done many times. If you have a state variable defined on top, for example, const first name, set first name is equal to an empty state. This we've done many times. Yeah, this is how you can get the value that the user has put into a state variable Why do you need this? Because eventually when the button is clicked, you want to use this first name and send it to the backend. Now what I've done is, I know this input box has this final input element that the user sees on the website. Here, this input element is actually present one component below. So why not make this on change sort of propagate to the parent? That's not what's happening. Nothing is propagating to the parent. The parent is giving a function. Okay, bhai, this is the function that child you should call anytime you change, so that I have the current DOM element that I can get the value from and put in a state variable. So this way I can create 4 state variables: first name, last name, username, and password. And I can be like, I want these to be populated as that specific input box is filled by the users. If the second one is filled by the user, I want to change last name to it. What is the benefit of doing this? Why did I do all of this? Why have I updated the input box component to take on change as an input? So that anytime any of these inputs are filled by the user and they click on sign up, I have access to these 4 in form of state variables, so I can send this request to the backend. So if I go here, now first name, last name, username, and password are being populated by whom? They're being populated here. But when does onChange get called? It gets called when this native input element may the event triggers, because I say कि भाई onChange equal to the onChange that parent sent you. If this feels weird, you will always rename this to props and put props.onChange here. That works as well. But what have we done here? Object destructuring. Okay, whatever onChange the user sent me, that is the onChange that will be called whenever this input has some keyboard presses on it. This is how these values reach the state variables. And given these values are already in the state variables, what do I need to do next? Anytime this button is clicked, I want to send the backend request, which I can do via Axios or via fetch. I am going to use Axios because it's a slightly cleaner library. So npm install Axios and then axios.post localhost /API/v1/user/signup. And what is the data I need to send? Username, first name, last name, password. Harkirat, this is an object. Why have you not done key value pair? Why have you not done this? Because in JavaScript, if you know the name of the key and the value is the same, you can actually put them together. You don't need to put username : username. You could do this, or you don't really need it if you know the value here and here are the same. So I'm going to use the slightly cleaner syntax and we're good to go. What is missing? Button doesn't know what onClick is. This isn't the native HTML button. This is a button component you created. If you go here, what do you see? This is the native button. Oh, it does take onClick as an input, thankfully, and it just propagates it down to the native button component. So in this case, things will just work. You can put an onClick here, and it really depends on what you want to name it. You can also name this onPress if you want. You just have to make sure that this button component also takes onPress as the object that's destructured here and passes it to the native button. The native button needs to propagate this event back to the parent. And how have we done it? We have said by button onPress, take this as a prop, take this as an input, And anytime on click is triggered on the native button component, call what the parent gave you, so that this logic triggers when the native button is pressed. What is the native button? This button right here, this sign up button. So now let me revert this to on click. Now let me save this. And I think we have everything. If I go, what have we done? Let's do a quick recap first. Added 4 state variables, updated input box to take on change as an input, populated the input variables, first name, last name, username, and password, and then on click did an axios.post to actually sign the user up. If I save this, if I go back here, inspect, let me put first name as something, last name as something, email as some random email, and password. If I click on the sign up button, what will happen? One second. Let me run npm run dev to restart the front end. Let me also open another terminal and run known-index.js to start the backend is already up on a different terminal. So I have backend up, I have front end up. Let's see. Missed something obvious. On press is not defined. That's my bad. I had changed this to on press. I had needed to revert it to on click. Now if I go here, put some random things here. If I go to the network tab, if I click on sign up, nothing happens. And why is that? Button on click equal to, Axios is not defined. Most probably I have not imported it yet at the top of my file. So let me do that. Import Axios from Axios. Let's try that one more time. Sign up, and there you go. You see a sign up request goes out. It returns you 411 because email is already taken /incorrect inputs. My email is pretty much incorrect. So let me rename this to asd@gmail.com and click on sign up. And it crashed the backend. Let's see, why did the backend crash? Password is required. User validation failed. Password is required. Seems like I'm not sending the right inputs here. So let's look at the sign up request. Let's look at the payload. Password is empty, even though I did put some password here. Interesting. Seems like there's a bug in my code. Maybe you already figured it out. The bug is somewhere here. If I type something here, that is somehow not reaching the state variables, because I can see the final password that went out is an empty password. Most probably I'm not setting the right state variables here is what I thought, but it seems like the right state variable is set here. This is password. This is set password. Let's try one more time. asd@gmail.com. Random name. First name should be, let's make this Harkirath. Let's make this Singh. Let's give it an ID and 123 123 123 123. Let's click on sign up. And it failed because the backend is down. The backend keeps crashing. Let me restart the backend. Sign up. And the backend crashed again because the password that went out is still empty. Did you already figure out why password is being sent as empty? Why is password not being set correctly as a state variable on this 4th input box right here? Let's see. The way I would debug this is I would log यहाँ पे कि password state value is, and then password. Let's refresh and let's see. Password state value is empty. As I put ASD here, I don't see any value being populated here. The same will not be true for first name, last name, and email. If I put email is username, you will see if I change the email changes here as well. Email is the right email variable. But if I change password, that is not being changed here. Were you able to figure out what the issue is already? I mean, I wasn't able to, I'm figuring it out as we go. Set password e.target.value placeholder on change. E kahan hai? I forgot to pass in e as a state variable. If I would have looked at the console, I would have seen an error representing this as well. But the issue was I did not have e as an argument here. And so e was not found as a variable here. Now let me try this one more time. Inspect network. If I click on sign up, the backend is down right now. Let me restart the backend. Again, you should have very strict try catches in your backend so that your backend doesn't keep crashing like this, which mine does right now. But for now, it's fine. Sign up, and there we go. Finally, we're able to create a user. We get back a token. So let's do a quick recap. What have we done on the sign up endpoint? We have implemented all these 4 values. I'm going to put in state variables. These 4 state variables right here. And when the button is clicked, I will send out a post request to /user/signup with these 4 state variables. That's a great start. What do we have to do next? Next comes the most difficult bit, which is once you get this response, where do you store the response.data.token? That's what you get from the backend, right? How do you store this? Where do you store this so that all your future requests contain these? What has happened after you sign up? What should happen after you sign up? After you sign up, this is your browser and this is the backend server right here. After you have signed up, you send the request to sign up, you get back a positive response. Okay, haan bhai, there goes the token that you can use. Now that you have this token, you need to make sure all future requests that you're sending, for example, you can send a request asking for who are other users on the platform. You need to send this token along with it. How can you maintain this session? How can you in the browser store ki haan bhai, I have signed in once. This is my token. Any future request, please send this token along. The way to do that is local storage. Here we will learn something new, or maybe we've discussed this before, which is local storage. Given that you have this token, where can you store it in your browser so that you're persistently logged in? When you go to app.100xdev.com, you are persistently logged in, right? I don't ask you for email password again and again. You only give it once. That means this token of yours is stored somewhere, right? That's the token that you're sending to the backend, and the backend is telling you, okay, you have access to 0 to 1 and 0 to 100 cohorts. So where is that token stored in the backend, in the browser? There are various places you can store it. The place where we will be storing it is the local storage. So let's see how you can do that next. All right, quick recap. We have written the logic for the sign up page. Sign in page should be very similar. Given that you get back the token, how can you store it in local storage is the question at this point. The answer is as simple as this. Local storage dot set item, a key and a value. The key in our case, I am naming this token. You can name this whatever you want. What this will do is, whenever I sign up and I get back a token, I am storing this somewhere in the browser. We will see very soon where. And now when I reach the /dashboard page, I can just send a request with this token and the backend can return me all the authed endpoints. Wherever the backend is using the middleware, wherever the backend needs the authorization header, I can get that authorization header from the local storage. Let's see this a little better in action. This is my page. Let me put some data and let me sign up. As soon as I sign up, if you look at the request, it went out, gave me a 200, which basically means the local storage code that I just wrote has run at least once. this code that I just wrote, this response came back correctly, which means this code ran. I stored this token somewhere. Let's see where it got stored. If I go to application/local storage, you will see email for sign in. Where is it? Application, local storage. I don't see it here. This is where I would have expected to see it. Let's try that one more time. Let's see if the code actually ran. If I go to signup.jsx, if I go here, let me put a breakpoint here. Sign up. And I see that the control does reach here. I've discussed this before. This is how you can put breakpoints and see whether or not control actually reached a certain place. Local storage. That looks right. Local storage.set item token, response.data.token. What is response.data.token? Oh, can you see the bug? I see it. I don't know if you see it. Can you see the bug? What is the bug in this line of code? I have not awaited the axios.post request. I also have to make this async. I forgot to await the axios.post request. So response.data.token is undefined, because response, if I log it here, you can actually log things on the console when you're stuck at a breakpoint. If I log response, it contains a promise. It does not contain the actual final value. So that was the bug right now. I did not await. Now if I try this one more time, put some random value, let me try signing up. Control does reach here. Let me remove the breakpoint. If I go to application/local storage, I see token is stored here. This is when things have sort of going in the direction of authenticated applications, of applications that can persistently store your sessions, similar to app.100xdevs.com. We make you log in once, you stay here forever until you log out. What happens when you log out? What should happen in this case when you log out? Just clear the token. Just either do local storage.set item token, empty string, or do local storage.delete token. I think that's the right thing. Let me see. Now remove item token. Whenever the user clicks on logout, just remove their auth key from the local storage, this thing right here, and you're good to go. You can assume that the user has logged out, because now they don't have this token stored in the browser anymore that they can keep resending in requests. The backend will start to reject the requests. The backend will only accept the requests if they are sending this token in every request as the authorization header. So let's see how you can do that next. We have signed up. Technically, we have the right token here. If I go to dashboard, I should be able to send the request to get back a list of all the users. So let's send that request to get back a list of all the users. What was that request? If you go to Postman, if you might remember, it was /users/bulk. If you send this request, it returns you all the users that currently exist on the backend. I need to send this same request here on the front end. This request is only for people who are signed in. If I remove this header, authorization header, and send the request, it still works. I guess it's fine. But ideally, this should only be gated to people who are actually logged in, so that, only a person who's logged in can get the list of users from the backend and no random person. Right now, it's open for everyone. All right. Let's send the request to get back the list of users. The other request we need to send is to get back your own balance. I'm unsure if this already exists on the backend. Probably doesn't. If it doesn't, we'll add it. But let's first finish this part. Let's add the function call to hit the backend given a filter, given something that the user is searching. If the user is searching Harkirat here, he should only see the list of users who have Harkirat in their name. And our backend request is already optimized for it. Our backend request already accepts a filter as an input, question mark filter equal to, if I write Harkirat TTTTT, it returns me 0 users because there are no users who have this first name or last name. But if I search for Harkirat, it gives me a bunch of users who have Harkirat as their name. So I can just send the request to this specific URL and filter it based on what the user might be searching for, what the user might have here. So I first need to store this in a state variable, and given this value in the state variable, I need to send the backend request to find all the users who have this specific name. If you want, you can also ignore this bit for now. The first point is just hitting the backend to get a list of users that you can render here. All right. For that, let's go back to, let's start from app.jsx. Let's go to dashboard. And here, as you can see, there's a users table or users component. Here, I had just hard coded a value here. Here, I should first initialize it to an empty array, and then, as always, add a use effect, which right now runs only once. We will eventually change this to run anytime the input value changes. But for now, it runs only once. And what is this guy supposed to do? Axios.get. We import Axios on the top. Localhost :3000 / what was the route? Let me copy it from Postman. Let's not include any filter for now. Eventually we can add a filter here. We can also remove this for now. Then response dot data. What do we get back? User. Response.data user is what I need to store here. And now seems like we're good to go. I have populated the global users state variable correctly. The rendering is already taken care of. That logic I had already written. All I had to do was send the request to this endpoint, and whatever data you get back, store that in the state variable here. Given I have this, if I refresh, as you can see, I see all the users. You should probably add some check in the backend to make sure you don't get yourself. You don't want to see yourself here. I have not added that logic, but you should add that logic and make sure your backend is a little more robust. Right now it returns you everything including you. If I search right now though, nothing happens. What should happen? I should hit the backend. You can also do front end filtering if you want here. Okay, just filter the front end, this list of users here, const filtered list equal to, a list which is a smaller subset of whatever is present here. But in the real world, what will happen is you have 1 million users. So you don't return everything to the user. You have pagination, you see a list of, page 1, page 2, page 3 like that. And the backend only returns you 10 items at a time. So in that case, you always send a fresh request anytime the user asks for an input here. So let's implement that really quickly. Okay, the backend will now filter filter equal to whatever the user has in this input box, which I can store in another state variable. Const filter, set filter, empty string, and anytime the input changes, set filter as e.target.value. Now that I set filter as e.target.value and I'm sending the request correctly here, why is there a red squiggly here? Missed something obvious. I missed something obvious here. Oh, there you go. Filtered list. Let me remove that. What have I done? Added a state variable, populated the state variable here, and said by the backend request will go to filter equal to filter. But this is the dynamic filter variable which is being updated based on the input. If I refresh and write Harkirat here, nothing happens. Does a backend request go out? Oh, I know what the issue is. Can you guess what the issue is though, guys? If this was a live class, this would have been a very nice bounty. Why is the backend request not going out? Why is nothing happening when I search something here? Dependency array. This filter is being used inside. If it's being used inside, it needs to be passed as a dependency. Anytime the filter changes, this code should rerun, right? And the backend request should re-go out. If it's an empty array, it will only happen once. If you add filter, then it will happen more than once. Save, refresh, and now If I search for Harkirat, you can see I only see 4 Harkirats. Remove it, I see everyone. I search for ASD, I only see these 3 users, so on and so forth. You should add debouncing here in the real world if you want, ideally. I've not added it yet. You should, but I'm not going to go into it yet. This is the common use case of debouncing when someone is searching across, values on a page like this. Alrighty, what's up next? When the person clicks on send money, they should go to the send page with, the right inputs. For example, send $ID equal to other person ID and name equal to Harkirat, whatever is the name of the user. So you can see the name here. And when you click on initiate transfer, this ID gets picked up from here and the backend request goes out. So I need to make sure this send money button takes me to a different page. How can I do that? Pretty straightforward. This user's component, which renders this button, which is right here, needs to be like on click. It can be an on click or it can be an href. This only expects an on click as an input. It can be an on click. On click equal to history dot. I'll come to what this is. How can you route from one page to another? Push slash send question mark ID equal to. This syntax seems weird. Let me do this. ID equal to user dot. Is it ID? What do we get back from Postman? Underscore ID. And name equal to user dot first name. This part, let me explain a bit. What is this history? Where does it come from? Basically, we need to take the user from this dashboard page when they click on this to a different page /send page. How can you do that when you're using React Router DOM? On click navigate. You want to navigate the user programmatically in React Router DOM, which is the routing library that we're using. The way to do that is using this use navigate hook, which, as you can see, this is the code for, okay, bhai, you get access to this use navigate hook, which you can import from React Router DOM, the library that we saw initially. Which library? Where is it? This library right here, the library that lets us do routing. They give you a hook called use navigate that you can use to actually navigate between pages, which is what we want right here. Okay, navigate the user to /send question mark ID equal to this thing and name equal to this thing. Can you do it a different way? Yes. You also get access to link by the same library. The same library gives you access to React Router DOM, gives you access to link, which lets you take the person to a different page when they click on a text. That is exactly what we were doing on the sign in page. So if I go to localhost 5173/sign-in, if I clicked on this sign in button, it took me to the sign in page. If I clicked on the sign up button, it took me to the sign up page. Here, I used what? I used the link component that React Router DOM gives you. But if you want to change the page on click, you have to, programmatically do it. Then you can use the use navigate hook, which is what I'm doing over here. Both of them are sort of equal as to however you want to route. As long as the routing is not a hard reload, you are good, which is true for both of these. All right, good. This is done. Let's see if it actually works, if it actually takes the person to the send page. Go to dashboard, look at users. Let me search for Harkirats and then click on send money. And as you can see, it took me to /send question mark ID equal to this thing and name equal to this thing. Now I just need to get name and ID as variables in this component, render the name here, put the amount, clicking on initiate transfer should send the backend request. Can you do it yourself? I think you should. The only thing you have to figure out is how do you get access to query parameters, which again React Router DOM gives you. So React Router DOM get access to query params. And as you can see, it gives you another hook called use search params that you can use. So if I go into my send money component, import use search params, and use it like this, const search params equal to this. I think the thing you have to do is search params dot get id, const id equal to this, and const name equal to get name. So whatever you want from the search parameters, whatever you want from the URL, what do you want? ID and a name. And this is how you can get them. Let me replace this name with friend's name here. And now if I refresh, it says Harkirat. So I have Harkirat. I probably, rather than putting A here, should put, the first letter of Harkirat. So name of 0. So I see H here, maybe 2 uppercase. So I have H here, I have Harkirat here, put an amount. I have access to the ID. The only thing that's left is sending out the request to actually make the money transfer. So here, the button on click, what should happen? Number 1, you should import Axios, the library. Number 2, you should send the post request, which was, again, I'll show you a trick here, which is you can actually go to Postman, and if you already have the request, which I did over here, the transfer request, you can click on code here, select Axios. It'll basically give you how to send the same request in Axios. So you can copy over some code from here if you want. As you can see, give you like a very nice config. This is sort of how you can do an Axios.request. This syntax will work. If you want to use a different syntax, you can do that as well. So you can basically copy over things from here rather than writing it all yourself. I'm going to write myself, but just giving you another way to use Postman to get the same request in Java, JavaScript, C, Golang, Dart, whatever language you want. All right. Let me write it myself though. Axios.post localhost :3000/API/v1/ what's the endpoint? Account/transfer. And what's the body? I need to send to, which is where I want to send the money, and amount, which is what we will store via a state variable in the amount state variable, which I will add very soon. And then lastly, the important thing, the headers, which need to have the authorization header, which needs to be what? Bearer space. What will I add here? Local storage dot get item token. The token that was populated initially when the user signed up, we are finally sending it. We are finally using it in an endpoint to send. If I don't send this, means the user isn't logged in, means the backend will reject the request. So this is where you finally are using the token that you stored initially. A few things you might ask at this point is, Harkirat, question number 1. If the token is stored in local storage, why is the sign-in endpoint still accessible? This should not be accessible. The person should always go to the dashboard page whenever the person goes to the website. Good question. Very good question. Very easily we can tackle this. You can, what you should ideally do is your backend should expose an endpoint called the /me endpoint. Okay, haan bhai, here the user will send in a token and you should respond back with whether or not this user /me endpoint, what is the user's name or whatever, whether or not this user is logged in, whether or not this token is valid. Ideally, you should expose this me endpoint. Once you do that, on every page, whenever you go to, localhost :5173/sign up or sign in, you should hit this me endpoint. And if it returns you something, you should redirect the person to dashboard. It means they are already logged in. And vice versa is also true. Whenever the user goes to /dashboard, you send the request to /me endpoint. And if it returns you null, if it returns you the user isn't logged in, you take them back to the sign in page. All right. Cool. Send money, amount. Let me put amount in a state variable. And now this amount that I'm sending out is probably right. This ID that I'm sending it out to is also right. And the authorization header also I think is right. So now let's see if clicking on the button actually initiates the transfer or not. $100, initiate transfer, and as you can see, a request went out. It says transfer successful. The payload was amount this to this, and the header did have the authorization header, which is exactly what we wanted. Sent. This value is the same as the value present in local storage right here. If I change this value to something random, let's say 123 and save it, and now if I try to send the same request, you will see the request fails because the backend doesn't know what where's the request header? Authorization. The backend basically doesn't know what this 123 is. It was expecting a token. I took away this token from the local storage. So now the backend will start to reject all your requests. If there was a /me endpoint that you had written, that would have also rejected the request. And then you would have just taken the person back to the sign up page. All right. Now my token is a little incorrect. So let me re-sign up with a new user. A few other things you probably want to do is, when you sign up, and if the sign up is successful, you redirect to /dashboard. Can you do that now? Have we written that code already? If you go to the sign up page, I can use the use navigate hook, const navigate, use navigate, and then I can navigate the user to, if the sign up is successful, /dashboard. Let me remove this. And now if I'm here and I sign up correctly, let's see, what am I missing? Network. Email is already taken. So let's make that a better email. Sign up, and the user is automatically taken to the dashboard. From here, they can send money if need be, which also will work as expected. You can add 10 different things here. You should add a loader when the user clicks on it and while the request is hung. But this is a great start. We have a basic working application. A lot of things to do, a lot of things that you won't have to worry about when you move to Next.js, but still you should worry about. For example, if the user is logged in, that user should not be able to go to /signup. In fact, when the user goes to the website's root domain /, they should be redirected to either sign in or to dashboard based on whether or not they're logged in. We'll leave that as an assignment. What do you need for this? You need a /me endpoint that returns the user there, basically returns them whether or not they're logged in. Only the backend can tell you whether or not you're logged in. You might have a token in your local storage, but doesn't necessarily mean that token is still valid. Your token might have an expiry. Your token might be invalid. For example, I just showed you someone can come to your machine and make that token invalid like this. So you need to rectify from the backend whether or not this token is valid. So whenever the user hits your website, first request that goes out should always be to the /me endpoint, get back whether or not you're logged in. And if you are, go to the /dashboard page. And if you aren't, go to the /signup or sign in page. All right. That's all for this one. Everything is working as expected. Let me push all of this code over to a new branch. Git checkout -b complete solution. This still isn't complete. Like the sign in endpoint doesn't work, but I'm assuming the sign in endpoint is, once you know the sign up endpoint, the sign in is pretty easy to implement. All right, let me push this in. So you can find the complete solution in the complete solution branch. I'll push this in right after the video and you can go here and look at it. Ideally, everything is present here, so you can start by coding it yourself. If you don't want to code it completely, copy over some components from this 18th page or whatever it was, 19th page. But try to code as much as you can. Even if it doesn't look the same, it's fine. The goal is break it down into smaller components, write all of your pages, and then add the functionality to actually hit the backend. Cool. With that, let's end it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.